folks, I'm Ronwise Gamgee and welcome to Quick and Dirty Roleplaying. In this video, I respond to a video made by Richard, the Wandering GM from the Guildmaster's Guides, titled 5 Ways to Use Dice Differently or Enhance Your D&D Game Using Dice in Your D&D 5e game. If you haven't watched that video, watch it first so you have some context as to what I'm responding to. The link to that video is in the description. At the 47-second mark, Richard states that when you want to give your players control over the situation, dice do the same, followed by allowing players to make a check, you're giving them control over their own fate. This is probably nitpicking on my part, but I don't find this statement to be entirely true. When a player rolls dice to determine the outcome of their character's action, things could turn out the way the players want them to, or not. Letting the player make a dice roll gives them an opportunity, not control, of the situation. For that, simply allow the player's character to make their intent occur. At the 1 minute 7 second mark, Richard mentions liking to do a varying spectrum of success in almost everything other than combat, and then proceeds with an Arcana roll example. This is what I refer to as a quality check, which is a concept that I find to be woefully underrepresented in an explicit manner, at least when compared to the binary pass-fail check that is ubiquitously prevalent in D&D 5e. Information gathering skills like Arcana and Investigation are the perfect candidates for quality checks and are terrible, in my opinion, as a binary pass-fail check. Just have some universal table of DCs to determine the quality of the information you find in 5-point increments, going from common knowledge to what a journeyman would know, to what an expert would know, to what a master would know, etc. Another alternative, one that I find preferable, is to use the taking 10 or taking 20 rules from D&D 3rd edition instead of making a dice roll. Or, if you really want the players to feel empowered, make a ruling that states that if you have a proficiency in a knowledge skill, they simply know the information or can learn the information if they perform the appropriate actions in the narrative. D&D DMs need to stop being so stingy with information by having players go through these dice rolling hoops. Also, replacing role-playing with skill checks is not only disempowering, it's disengaging and boring. At the 1 minute 56 second mark, Richard starts to give an example regarding rolling multiple times to determine failure with a climbing scenario. Granted, the way he explains the scenario about losing a handhold on one climbing check and requiring another climb check to see if he can regain their grip does create tense narrative. However, this seems like a variation on the theme of degrees of outcome, only instead of using the difference between the roll and the DC, it's split into multiple rolls, like a skill challenge from 4th edition. At the 2 minute 35 second mark, Richard states that if you want them, the players, to feel out of control, don't give them the option of rolling. Again, also not entirely accurate. The DM can simply say, "You do it," which doesn't give them the option of rolling, but it entirely puts control in the player's hands. Now, when the DM states that the character automatically fails, he still respected player agency, but the player didn't get what they want, and they had no chance of getting what they wanted, which can make sense depending on the context of the situation. Starting at the 2 minute 53 second mark, Richard starts talking about dynamic DCs, which is basically his version of what I call the quality check. However, he then talks about how if a barbarian failed their Arcana check by 5, they failed their check, whereas if the wizard failed their Arcana check, they'd still get some information. Assuming this barbarian is proficient in the Arcana skill, just like the wizard, why give this preferential treatment to the wizard and not the barbarian? Being able to cast magic is not a prerequisite for proficiency in the Arcana skill, and the Arcana skill is one of those skills where if you don't have it, you shouldn't be able to use it at all. but D&D 5e doesn't use the notion of trained-only skills like previous editions, so there's really no justification to dick the barbarian over like that. At 4 minutes and 15 seconds in, Richard starts talking about rolling for random things. At this point I think, okay, random tables to generate content, that's cool, keeps things dynamic. But then he starts talking about telling players to roll perception checks, just because. Well, actually, it's just to mess with his players' minds and has nothing to do with what's actually happening in game. I see this as counterproductive because it makes me lose trust in the DM. If you want to make me feel uneasy during the session, foreshadow stuff in the game world rather than pulling this bullshit about rolling for stuff just to keep me wondering. This does not enhance storytelling. Further, at the 5-minute 36-second mark, he says that he doesn't use random rolls to mess with his players. So he's just lying to his audience then. Later on, he talks about easing the tension with more dice rolling and uses a perception roll example just to confirm to the players that their characters notice that the room is clear of all danger. Honestly, it just seems like he likes to see lots of dice rolls. Here's my take on it. Whenever the player has to make a dice roll, it means that their character is being challenged. Will they succeed or not? When used appropriately, as in for situations that are actually challenging, dice rolls are great for creating tension. However, one of the beauties of tabletop RPGs is that the player's character can attempt to do anything within their capabilities, and due to the open-ended nature of the game, the way a player can describe their character's actions are infinite. There is a tactical infinity that players can utilize to come up with creative solutions to problems. Creative solutions that, in a rules-light game, would force the GM to analyze a situation and possibly say, that's a good idea, you do it. When a DM lets the rules of the game run them, rather than them using the rules as a foundational framework to then build off of via rollings for unusual situations, the incentive to analyze the situation and make a wise determination atrophies as it's replaced with make a skill check. This compulsion to call for skill check seeps into mundane activities, such as noticing things even when the player describes in vivid detail the painstaking efforts their character is making to look for a concealed mechanism or to spot a hidden ambusher, never mind to hear what's on the other side of the door. It's like a disease of the oscillating wrist, this compulsion to roll dice for every action. At the 6-minute 43-second mark, Richard talks about how he fudges dice to enhance the story. So he's using D&D to entertain players with a story. This suggests that certain outcomes are not up for dispute, and that an outcome that is not up for dispute is an outcome that is predetermined. In this case, dice are used primarily to make the players feel tense, not to determine the outcome, or not primarily to determine the outcome of uncertain actions within the game world. If you don't want that level of uncertainty in your games, don't use binary pass-fail mechanics. Instead, stick to quality checks and or keep part of the outcome of an action as deterministic while using a dice roll to determine other factors, such as what price the PC had to pay in order to succeed. That's a perfectly fine way of circumnavigating non-heroic total party kills while still making dice rolling matter, because the way to make dice rolls not matter is to fudge those dice rolls, unless it's to address an outcome that makes absolutely no sense within the context of the situation. So my 5 ways to use dice differently or to enhance your D&D game would be: 1. Use a quality check over a pass-fail check for information gathering. 2. If you have a proficiency, it means you're proficient, which should justify skipping some skill checks and automatically giving the character the cookie. 3. A skill check represents your best efforts and the results should stick. No re-rolling unless the circumstances have drastically changed. 4. If it doesn't have to do with anything related to in-game events, Don't use dice rolls to create tension. It's dishonest. And 5, if you're not willing to test fate, don't roll dice. If you're not willing to test fate in some aspects, but are in others, the dice roll affects only the parts you're willing to leave to fate. It may seem like I'm presenting a bad faith response here, but what the video presented was just bad advice in my opinion. So if you like this video, like and leave a comment, and keep it respectful and relevant. Until next time, take care folks, and play to find out what happens.